But the big question of today is, will making unhealthy food more expensive stop people from eating it?
We're joined now by Matthew Lesh, Head of Research at the Adam Smith Institute. Adam, we need to stop people eating junk food, so we're going to charge more for it. Does that make sense to you?
Like it's a pretty classic nanny statist approach to think that you can manipulate people's behaviour top down through these very scrawny taxes. Now, what we think is going to cost the average household about £172 a year. It's going to push up the cost of jam by around 50%, the cost of cornflakes by probably around 30%. It's going to be a big tax on things like ketchup and soy sauce, and as well as the things that make life worth living, chocolate and Skittles. Now, for all that tax, we're talking about an average reduction in calories, according to the government's best estimates, of about half a biscuit worth of calories. So simply, no, this tax is not going to reduce obesity, but it will push up the cost of living for Brits, and it'll push up the cost of living, particularly for the poorest households who spend more of their income on food. And I think it was welcome to see Boris Johnson has effectively already ruled out this tax by saying he's not really attracted to the idea of putting extra taxes on hardworking people.
Both Gloria and I, we don't think the government's got the guts to do this. We think it will annoy too many ordinary people. We think this is just, flying a kite, and it won't turn into government policy. What do you think, Matthew?
Look, I think that's quite likely at this point. This is notably an independent report from Henry Dimbleby, and the government can choose whether or not it rejects their suggestions. And it's gone down like a bit of a lead balloon today, I think, from right across the political spectrum. People know obesity is a serious issue. It is hard to eat healthy. It's hard to exercise. But taxing poorer households to try to achieve that is not the way forward. And there's always this contradiction at the heart of these proposals, because the other thing that could potentially happen is that we could see reformulation, which basically means making foods a little bit more miserable, which is, removing salt and sugar and all those nice things that you should have in moderation but do make life enjoyable. Or shrinkage. We're seeing a lot of shrinkage in terms of the size of chocolate bars, which is effectively a type of inflation in itself. So in any situation here, if you put on this tax, you're going to be losing for households. And I don't think the government wants to, particularly if, talking of your previous conversation, thinking about levelling up and the red wall voters, with a very big working class voting base who really does care about hip pocket concerns, this is something that's not a particularly great idea politically.
Isn't there a case, though, for saying to food manufacturers, if you are the government, we want you to put no more than X% of sugar in or X% of salt in these foods, and you can't put prices up? We demand it as the government, and then, you can get healthier food. It's made more healthily, but no one feels the pinch in their pocket.
Look, I don't necessarily want the government to be telling food manufacturers how to produce their food. I think it should be up to us to make the decisions. And I think Coca-Cola is a good example here. You can have the full fat, the full sugar Coke, or you can go for the Coke Zero. And it's about having the different opportunities in terms of what you want to consume. No one is in any doubt that when you're having a chocolate bar, it's a treat. It's not something you should have all day, every day, or all the time. And it's something that kids should have in relatively small quantities. But at the same time, the problem is if you set these kind of levels in particular bits of food, the danger is that people will just end up consuming more. It's the same danger with the soft drink tax. So if you tax soft drinks a little bit, well, people might end up consuming calories elsewhere. So you don't actually address the obesity in a serious way, because unfortunately, if you're seriously obese, you tend to have issues in terms of what you can control you're eating. So a slight increase in price is probably not going to have that much impact, and you might just swap to other calories. So I'm not sure reducing the sugar and salt content in individual products is going to actually have that much effect either, sadly.
Well, we've got you, Matthew. We're just going to look at some of the numbers, some of the implications of this national food strategy proposals. They would mean an extra 9p on Mars bars,
87p for Frosties,
£3 per kilogram tax on sugar sold for use in processed foods, which would push up lots of foods across a range of many varieties.
£6 per kilogram tax on salt sold for use in processed foods.
I mean, these are quite serious increases in taxation, aren't they, Matthew, that will be felt, as you so aptly put it, on the hip pocket of ordinary men and women who just want to eat something nice.
Yeah, it's kind of a miserable idea in the first place, just to think that, well, we can solve all the people's problems by just putting a bit of a tax onto them. Of course, it's going to apply not only in supermarkets, but also in restaurants if it were to go ahead. And all this for very little benefit. I honestly just don't know what Dimbleby was thinking with this particular proposal. Obviously, obesity is a problem, but you can't tax your way out of what are deep-seated societal and human problems when it comes to plenty. I mean, quite frankly, the reason why we eat a lot is because food is relatively accessible in a way historically it was not. And the fact that there's now more people in the world who are overweight than there are who are malnourished is in some ways an unfortunate side effect of how much human progress we've made. And then being responsible around food is something you need to learn from a young age, knowing how to exercise, getting into good habits. That's not something you can do through a tax. It's actually far, far more difficult. And I'd like to see a lot more discussion about that kind of educational approach rather than this very top-down, heavy, manipulative approach that is going to inevitably hit poorer households.
But what's your solution? Is it just to let people get fatter and fatter, iller and iller, die earlier and earlier? Because that is what's happening, isn't it? And actually, if you look at mortality, then that will fall harder on the people you say you care about, which is the poorer. So it's very easy to say, well, this nanny state stuff makes no sense. But actually, do we just ignore the fact that people are getting sick from obesity?
Look, I don't think we should ignore obesity as a problem. I think it is a serious problem. We shouldn't exaggerate the problem. There are always fights about statistics and who's getting fatter and in what situation and why that's happening and what kind of food people are consuming. You can get into very technical debates about this. I don't think the sad fact is that if these were easy issues, we would have solved them by now. We would have fixed them. And obesity, again, it's this basically a mixture between whatever genes you were lucky enough to have. Some people can eat loads of junk food and they'll never put on an ounce of weight. Others need to be extremely careful in their dieting. We're getting increased understanding of that issue. You can do these increasingly available tests to understand what particular foods are going to have the most impact on you, and what foods you should therefore avoid because they're going to go straight to the hip, not the hip pocket, but the hip. And as a consequence of that, I think it is about kind of maximizing individual choice, individual education, rather than doing these kind of heavy-handed techniques that aren't going to prove particularly effective.
Thank you, Lesh, of the Adam Smith Institute. Good discussion. Thanks a lot for joining us.